listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatments. It is Thursday, Misfits, and it's time for some news about unemployment. Usually I just talk to you guys about unemployment figures in the monologue, but this week's a little bit different because the Labor Department has changed the way it calculates unemployment, introducing a seasonal adjustment mechanism. So we thought we'd bring in the big guns to help us wade through it all. We are joined by Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. Steve, thanks for coming on again.
Hey, no problem at all. Thanks for having me.
And now I think I might have just misspoken. There has been a seasonal adjustment mechanism, I think, but they've altered it, right? So I'm going to start with the figures, and then I'm going to turn to you to help us figure them out. The government's official count of new unemployment filings for last week was 833,000. This is an increase from the week before, which was 826,000. The New York Times tells me that the seasonally adjusted number of new unemployment claims last week was 881,000, and the total, as they're reporting it, is 13.3 million people currently collecting regular state benefits. So can you talk to us about this change to the seasonal adjustment of unemployment figures? What is it and how are they doing it?
Well, so first things first, I went chasing around all over the internet trying to identify anyone that could clearly articulate what it is that they've done. And just so you understand how convoluted this is, the most expert analysis out there says it's complicated. It's complicated. That's the best explanation they have for what they've done. But what they're really trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, look, this is a once-a-century kind of scenario. We don't really know how to handle gauging what's happening around us. We don't know how many of these are directly related to COVID-19 shutting down the economy and how many of them are actually, quote unquote, the typical seasonally adjusted rates that we have for summertime employment and Christmas employment and stuff like that. So, I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's a bit of a mystery, but I will say this, given that it's an election year and given that all of a sudden they're trying to show that jobs are not as bad as it seems, although we know clearly that they are very, very bad, and I think the numbers are trying to hide that. I think there's a little bit of politics going on here, to say the very, very least, heading into November. So I think, while I can't give you the formula that they've tried to use to do this, there's no question whatsoever that two things are at play. Number one, we're in unprecedented territory. They don't know how to handle it. And number two, we are in a political year, and it wouldn't shock me at all if, in fact, this was something that was brought in by the Trump administration to kind of make things look a little better than they are.
Yeah, I mean, of course, my first thought was, okay, this is going to be a way to undercount unemployment even further than we already do. Yeah, so seems like that's the only conclusion there.
Absolutely. And what I hate about these kind of measurements, I mean, you have all the different flavors of the non-adjusted rate of unemployment, the adjusted rate of unemployment, the seasonally adjusted rate of unemployment. And in reality, let's just be fair. Millions upon millions upon millions of people are unemployed right now, and our government is doing nothing whatsoever to rectify that. But on either side of the aisle, they're playing political games. I assume the Democrats would like very much to carry a very, very bad economy into November to ensure Biden wins. I'm sure the other side, the Republicans, would like very much to carry a fake number through to November to ensure Trump gains re-election. And it's left to us to look around at family and friends and loved ones and people that we know and see them unemployed. See, there's been a request for evictions and to have a moratorium through the end of the year. But in reality, I mean, it's really bad. There's nothing meaningful happening right now to stave off any of this.
Yeah, I mean, and Steve, just to your point, a lot of people, I guess this is where wealth comes in America, are able to look around maybe for support to their friends and family. But we also have to remember a lot of people don't have family and friends. And if you look around and if you do have family and friends and they're all unemployed as well, I think this is where you kind of get into the realization that it's about more than just having a job and accumulating some capital here in America. It's about wealth. And this is why white people, if a person loses their job, they have these broad support systems, but so many millions of Americans have nowhere else to turn. And I think that's what's so shocking when you actually get into these numbers, that there are the long-term unemployment numbers, which tell you one thing about a person. If you get into the nuances of people who are long-term unemployed for different reasons, it tells one story. When you look at who's unemployed now during the pandemic, it can tell a different story. You have some white-collar workers and other people who are able to kind of get through this time. It's not easy by any means, and I'm not trying to belittle that, but they're able to get through this time right now because they have that broader support system. And so it's interesting that we always just kind of take these numbers and think about, oh, X amount of million of people unemployed just means Y thing, as opposed to, well, it depends on which one of those populations you look at, could mean much, much different things in terms of a response and a solution to those issues.
I couldn't agree more. You know, I recently read a book by a hero of mine named Sandy Darity. He's a racial justice economist out of Duke University. Guy is just a brilliant man. He and his wife, Kirsten Mullen, wrote a book called From Here to Equality. And it broke down the case for reparations for African Americans who, slavery, basically going back that far and showing every step along the way how the U.S. has screwed them. And one of the big points he makes in there is, hey, it's not just a matter of, having a job. It's not just a matter of this stuff. It's all the extraneous support systems that you deprived us of, that as we come into these things, even a person making $150,000 a year, if they lose that money, they don't have a familial system with generational wealth to support them during those lean times and many other people, and this is why things are getting even tighter now. It's finally hitting the white community, whereas it was typically a black and brown issue. Now you're starting to see people in the white community get hit, just like you did with the opioid epidemic. And now maybe sadly, it will be talked about and addressed. But when it was just African Americans, it was just, like you said, it was just sort of glossed over and, oh, well, just another couple people unemployed. It is a very, very serious problem, and it definitely impacts minorities in a way that other people can't even fathom.
Yeah, I mean, it's also about dignity in work. And I just think, this is kind of a random thought, but Elie Wiesel's book, Night, he talked about the ways in which he survived the concentration camp was to find a purpose. And that human desire and need for purpose, I think we often overlook. Oh, if you have a job, you make some money, and then you can have the rest of these things. But if you have a job and work without dignity, that is no way to live. And the psychological impacts and damages that comes along with belittling people, not thinking that they're good enough or smart enough or have enough skills to work is absolutely disgusting. And so beyond just these numbers, again, that are treated in kind of macroeconomics or within American politics, is also the psychological and sociological damage that comes within these communities that go decades without work and are just relying on the state. And I don't think a lot of people want to be relying on the state. And this is the big fallacy, obviously, of Republicans and the right of saying, oh, people don't want to actually work. They just want to live off of welfare. But that doesn't satisfy people's desire and need for purpose, Steve. And I think that conversation also needs to be had here as well.
Yeah, let me, if you don't mind, let me digress into a personal soapbox momentarily. The federal job guarantee is something that I'm a huge advocate of and have been championing for many, many years. And it shows itself right now. Going back to Reconstruction era, they had not truancy, but vagrancy laws that were used to bring freed men and escaped slaves. It's back into custody of the state and made slaves of the state, et cetera. And you've got current situations where people released from prison who have no meaningful way of getting a job are now in violation of parole and are put back into the system through recidivism just based on nothing more than not having access to gainful employment. And so a federal job guarantee would have satisfied so much of what we're experiencing right now, because what it does is it actually doesn't compete with regular employment. What you're doing is you're serving your local community. And so by giving people a living wage with living federal benefits, you give everyone a chance to serve their community, have no one without a job that doesn't want a job. If you want a job, you got a job. It's a right. And then the flip side to that, and this is what I think is really important, by redefining what work is. You're not worrying about automation. You're talking about care work. You're talking about serving your local community, and all the things that that for-profit industries don't find profitable. Suddenly now there are opportunities that the state can fund that, and this is a perfect way to have provided a perfect counter-cyclical automatic stabilizer to prevent the bottoming out of the economy and to prevent so much suicide that comes from unemployment, and also the stigma that is associated with it. I just think that we are really missing the boat. Our Congress is really failing us, and a federal job guarantee, more so than any UBI or anything else, is structurally changes the way society operates. Because not only does it give a new definition of what the wage floor is, instead of a minimum wage, you're now providing a living wage, and the private sector has to meet or beat that to pull you out of the job guarantee. So this is a real opportunity to functionally change generational wealth issues, to redistribute wealth back down to the bottom, to give everyone a fair chance, and use public money, not raise taxes to do this, but use literal public money, just like we do the F-35, just like we did the military-industrial complex, do it right there on the poor people in this country and these poor folks that have been let go, that have no real meaningful way of finding employment right now. And I think this is a time for a federal job guarantee in a way that we've never seen before in our lifetimes.
Hey, Steve, I want to turn you back to a few of the figures from today, but I mean, this is a really interesting conversation. So I wonder if you could tell us just briefly, who's opposing such a federal jobs guarantee, right? What are the forces standing in the way?
Oh, interesting. So this Unity Commission that Stephanie Kelton, Bernie's economic advisor, and AOC and Derek Hamilton and Sarah Nelson of the airline union, all of them were on that committee, and they pushed forward not only the Green New Deal, but they pushed forward the job guarantee, et cetera. And Team Biden didn't want anything to do with the job guarantee. They rejected it outright. They rejected a Green New Deal. They rejected Medicare for all. They rejected just about every single thing that was on the table. Well, not only does that mean the Dixiecrats and the newly, converted Republicans turned Democrats that support Biden are against it, but of course, Team Trump is against it as well. But we've got a lot of forces against this. There's reason to keep people down. It helps business continue to discipline the population. And by keeping us in a wanting state, they can get us for pennies on the dollar like they did the last recovery. So that's what the forces against us are right now. And it's up to us to educate one another, because most people don't think about the fact that a federal job guarantee isn't just make work. We're actually allowing the local communities to figure out what they want to compensate, what matters to them, and build a job around that. And a person, imagine being someone who has been abused or someone who is in really bad shape. They can pick up and leave and go anywhere in the country with a federal job guarantee and instantly have work at a living wage with benefits. I mean, it's huge. But we are up against a buzzsaw of people that don't understand what the job guarantee is. And we're also against a buzzsaw against people that flat out don't want it to come to be. So real challenging times.
I mean, that sounds like freedom, Steve. And instead, we're told that really economic freedom is this gig economy. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those unemployment figures, because to me, it is really illustrative that we separate out traditional unemployment claims from what has been called during this lockdown pandemic relief claims. This is the fund that's for freelancers, part-time workers, and gig workers. And so it's just like, we separate out these categories of people enough and no one will add up all the numbers and really witness this wave of poverty cresting across the nation. Because pandemic relief claims were up by a lot this week. There were 759,000 new claims filed this week, up from just over 600,000 the week before. And I wonder if you can tell us, to me, this looks like a more telling indicator of what's actually happening in our economy. This to me looks like sputtering, right? A little bit of money comes in, you hire someone temporarily, and then it's gone again. Or a store opens and sees a surge of support, but it's not sustained. So what do these figures say to you, Steve?
Well, what they say to me is, number one, is that we've gotten away from full-time employment. You look around, there's so many quote unquote contractors that are at will employees. Forget just the contractors that are at will employees. We also have the e-lancer, the soloists, the gig economy people out there trying to make a buck by hook or by crook. And what's happened is there's no money out there for people to do extraneous things, to do extra stuff that they would otherwise maybe have invested in. So the gig economy is highly dependent on people having some liquidity to be able to pay for these gig-type jobs. And with Uber, for example, many people aren't going out. They're not traveling around with the pandemic. So Uber drivers are missing money. There's all kinds of stuff within this that you watch the downward pressure on the little guy at the bottom. And the gig economy is what catches everyone that can't be in the quote-unquote normal economy. You got people living a very precarious life out there. And without that liquidity within the economy, those people, those gig jobs dry up as well. I think that's what you're seeing right now. I think that it's like a boulder going down a hill, and it takes everything with it.
Right.
Except for what, like Bob was saying, the white collar folks that have some generational support are able to kind of ride the tide here. But the rest of us, yep.
Yeah, and
that's what I think you're seeing.
We started the show talking about the stock market records this week, and it seems like, of course, tech stocks are really driving that growth, including Apple. And I was just thinking, so Apple reopened all its manufacturing plants in China by April, I think, and it opened its retail stores there in March. So it sort of seems like these big companies are benefiting from decisions made by other countries, China chief among them, and making money continually for the most wealthy Americans, while the rest of us are going to suffer from the result of our government's decisions, and will probably suffer more if we continue to sanction China, ratchet up tensions there, and continue our trade wars. Have I got that right?
Well, I think you got part of that right, but I think the other part of this is, and this is, in my opinion, key, is that our federal government can be filling this void regardless of what China does, right? I mean, we're kind of allowing ourselves to be both victim and beneficiary of any actions that happen without any kind of intervention. And I think that, you look at China. China has managed their own currency forever. They when they need something, they spend it. When they want something, they do it. The United States government is purely going with a laissez-faire kind of a Ayn Rand approach to things, to let the free market be free. And it's really, the flip side to that is that the Fed itself is actually infusing money into these companies by buying bad debts to allow them to have liquidity, which keeps that money trapped in Wall Street versus ever making it to Main Street. So I think that there's a couple things at play there, all of them intertwined, of course, but they are mutually exclusive. Wall Street being propped up by the Fed buying out bad debt, that is a choice that they're making to lift those companies up, figuring that they don't want that to collapse because then everyone else will collapse. And there's probably some logic to that. But I definitely believe that between watching what the outside world does to us without intervening for regular people, and at the same time heavily intervening to support these companies, and you notice Wall Street is prospering like never before. While we're sitting there struggling. So
all right. We can't let an MMT evangelist go without asking you one last question about this new debt story, right? The Congressional Budget Office yesterday said that U.S. debt is going to exceed the size of the country's entire economy next year. First time since 1946 that federal debt exceeded GDP. And we're also going to see the budget deficit achieve its biggest percentage of deficit to GDP since 1945. And of course, I'm worried the debt hawks are going to come out and prime us all for austerity. So what's your take on this big news?
Oh, you just nailed it. I'm so much less forgiving, though, to be honest with you. I'm downright. I believe that the individuals that are pushing the debt narrative are domestic terrorists. And I mean this with the most severe, straight, no-smile face of all time. I believe that they are domestic terrorists, and there are people dying from these decisions. Now, if I pull a trigger and I shoot someone, then I'm a murderer. But if I sit there and do an economic policy that kills millions more, I'm just an economist, right? I see this as honest-to-God murder. And I think that if the more of us realize that austerity is murder, that we can fight back against this stuff. But it is exactly as you laid it out. The national debt, for folks that aren't familiar with this, is nothing more than the sum total of every untaxed U.S. dollar in the economy today from the beginning of time. And it amounts to the net money supply. That's really all that the national debt is, because each dollar is a tax credit. And so when they add it all up, that's what the national debt is. So they're wringing their hands over this is ridiculous. What we've done, the reason why the quote-unquote deficit is so high is because tax receipts are way down because economic activity has come to a crawl. And the federal government, in order to keep the economy alive, has spent significantly more money into the economy to keep it floating. The minute you start cutting that, you're going to destroy the economy with austerity. And this is why Obama's long non-recovery was so long and so non-recovery. They truly never, his whole idea of eat your peas really was just bad politics and bad economics. And we're about to see that again, I think, happen right now. That's why I'm so adamant about getting this word out. I'm glad you asked the question, because folks really need to understand the national debt is really one side of the ledger. The other side is, you could call it the national assets, because the government's debt, which it creates this money out of thin air, is our surplus. A deficit on the government side is a surplus on the private sector side. The issue is, where is that surplus sitting? Is it sitting in the rich people's hands, or is it sitting in the productive economy with us, we the people, at the 99%? By the way,
Right.
rest in peace, David Graeber.
Right. All right. Fighting words from Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. Steve, always great to have you on. And where should our listeners go to find more of your work?
We just launched our new website. I'm so glad you asked. It's at www.realprogressives.org. And let me tell you, it is just a beautiful website. Please sign up, follow us. We're also on YouTube, of course, and we're on Rockfin. If you guys follow Rockfin, we're all over Facebook, you name it. But come to our new website, please. You will absolutely love it. And, of course, our podcast, www.macro.cheese.com, and you can hear all kinds of good economic stuff.
All right. Check out the website, Misfits.